On that note, I want to invite you, if you would join me. If you have a Bible, grab it. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. If you don't have a Bible, then a couple things will be helpful for you. There's a paperback Bible in the tray of the chair that's in front of you, and it has all the notifications turned off. You'll notice, and if that's helpful for you, you know who you are. But if you don't even own a Bible, help us do a favor for you maybe. Let that be our gift to you. Let that be our gift, and a few things. We don't want to sell Bibles. We want to get as many Bibles, what we believe is God's Word, to as many hands as possible. And if this is maybe even one of the first times you're opening a Bible, don't be afraid to look at the table of contents. You'll find kind of a roadmap for what the message of the Bible is, where we find ourselves today. As a church, we've been walking through one of the letters to, as the title suggests, a church in Corinth. You'll find it toward the end of the Bible where all of the letters to these different churches are, the encouragements to these Christian communities. This one's written by the Apostle Paul. The Apostle simply, it's a title given to the people who were eyewitnesses to the resurrection of Jesus. And while he was, at one point, his story was that he was an enemy of God. He was actually trying to persecute Christians. He meets Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, and actually helps start this church. He becomes a missionary and a church planter. And so several years later, after helping start this church in a cosmopolitan city, a fast-moving city, Corinth, he's writing this letter of exhortation. And it's different than other letters you might read in that there's not a real clear beginning, middle, and end with a kind of a thesis of the point he's making. Instead, it's as if he's just fielding a letter that questions from a letter he received, but also from reports he received about some dysfunction happening in the church. You see, the people in Corinth were like good citizens of any city. They looked, talked, and acted like the people around them. But when they met Jesus, their story changed. But as you might know yourself, is that they drug a lot of their old story in with them. And we find in chapter 15, the Apostle Paul reminding them of that story, the gospel, that Jesus really did live a perfect life. He really died, and he really was raised on the third day. And in the first section, he gives kind of the proof of the resurrection. We saw that a couple of weeks ago, that there's eyewitnesses still alive. You can go talk to them. In the second section we saw last week, he gave as if it were kind of the consequences of not believing, as if to say, you're right. If there's no resurrection, then here's your problem. What do you do with sin? What do you do with injustice in the world? Where do you find forgiveness, and how do you give forgiveness? Where are you going to get that? Not only that, if there's no resurrection, and this life is all there is, then on one hand, Christians are to be pitied more than anyone else. But on the other hand, what are you even doing? Eat, drink, for tomorrow we die. If this life is all there is, then get all you can. But since Jesus was raised from the dead, in fact, was raised from the dead, consider something different. You see, these people had begun to, like most of the philosophers of the day, begun to question the resurrection, not necessarily of Jesus. It seems like they could have believed that, but under the teaching of the modern philosophers at that time, that we'll call dualism, the Platonic dualism, is that the physical is bad and the spiritual is good. So when someone comes along and says, oh, by the way, Jesus was raised from the dead and he's going to raise all your dead bodies from the dead as well, that wasn't just kind of implausible, that was offensive. They had believed, like, the body is bad. It's even, in some of the writers would call it a prison or a tomb. And death is a doorway. Death is a gift. You finally get free of this body. And so when the Apostle Paul and the other apostles come along and say, no, Jesus was raised from the dead, he really had a body, he really was human, and he really died, and he's really alive again in a glorified body, and you can too, they were like, ew, forget that. And so now he begins to address some of the questions that were being raised at this time, and I would say even the questions we might face today. So beginning in verse 35, we're going to spend our time in what is kind of the second part of this chapter, the longest chapter in the letter, from verse 35 to verse 49. So follow along with me. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? You foolish person! What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And what you sow is not the body that it is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. but God gives it a body as he has chosen. And to each kind of seed its own body. For not all flesh is the same, but there is one kind for humans, another for animals, another for birds, another for fish. There are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is of one kind, and the glory of the earthly is of another. There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for star differs from star in glory. So is it with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. I pray this becomes God's word to us today. Follow with me for just a moment through a little bit of show and tell. Those in the back won't be able to see this very well, but I want you to look as closely as possible to this. You see it? You can't? That even proves the point. Can you see it? You see it? What is this? Some of you know. Now, what you'll find here is that I was able to collect this under what is one of the largest maple trees in our neighborhood. Not the largest, there are some that are a little bit bigger, but this one's old, it's massive, it's beautiful. And under it, you'll see is this little thing, this little critter thing. Lovingly known by my scientific study as helicopters. Helicopters. What a beauty of God's creation. These seeds don't just fall. I mean, they could just fall to the ground. Oh no, these seeds dance. They just dance all the way to the ground so that evidently the wind will cause it to slowly get where it's supposed to go. And not only that, but the wind will carry it over there somewhere, and then its weight will hold it where the seed's pointing down. Now, think of it this way. Imagine trying to explain that to someone who had never seen it by showing them this. Right? Imagine someone who's never seen a tree. They've never seen, right, thousands and thousands of leaves and its size and its, right, they've just never seen it in their whole life. And imagine trying to explain that by only having this. Right? Can you imagine how difficult that would be? And trying to say, well, actually, right, think of it actually, this is going to turn into, right? And can you imagine just how befuddled they would be? Just like, what? I mean, even effectively, like, if they were to, the most obvious thing is like, will it look like that? And it's like, no. It'd be cool though, right? Like, can you imagine if this was actually 80 feet tall? Just one big, massive wing? I don't know. I don't even know what to call it. Okay? Imagine trying to explain that to a person who only could see this. You see, what Platonic dualism couldn't make room for was a resurrected body. And for them, it was as if to say, like, there's no way that this corrupting, decaying body that's falling apart, that's doomed to die, there's no way this could be anything else. Now, here's our challenge. The challenge for our own application, for a modern equivalent, is not necessarily being able to imagine life after death or somehow thinking that the resurrection is not great. Our practical application here might just be, at the very least, that your imagination is stirred for what is to come. And the greatest challenge to doing this, I think, is twofold, and I'm going to give you 2 bits of homework. If you hear nothing else that I share, because after all, none of this will make sense without these, here's your homework. Number 1, contemplate and discuss your own death. Really you. Not abstractly, not that, all things, good things must come to an end, and, the beginning of one thing is the end of the other, and the end of the other. I mean this, like, talk about it. In gospel communities, talk about your own death. Now, I'll warn you here, one of the ways this is a challenge for us is that most of you will resort to humor. Right, so I say this often as if you're like when pastors or doctors or funeral home workers or sometimes first responders, as a bunch of people who deal with death, talk about death. When we hang out, we have a really, really dark sense of humor. And again, forgive us if you are facing death and that seems dismissive. To prove the Apostle Paul's point here, I think, is that's our way to cope with it. That's just, we're trying to cope with how permanent and awful this is, and the best thing we can do is to keep from, laugh or cry, to keep from being overwhelmed, and just kind of joke about it. So even if you're in discussion with someone about your own death, ask real questions. When do you think you're going to die? How do you think you're going to die? You want to get real fun? Why do you think you're going to die? And know that as people kind of make jokes along the way, that's just our way of coping with its finality. Number 2 then, contemplate and discuss the return of Christ. Now, for 2 different people in the room, maybe if you're in this room and you have questions about Christianity, you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, you wouldn't say you're a believer in Jesus. I'm really grateful you're here, especially with your questions. In fact, this text begins with the question of a skeptic. And so I want you to know, this is a good place to ask these questions. And so for you, the question might not be contemplate Jesus coming back, but even just with your own imagination, marvel for a moment. If someone or something were to come and fix and make right the things that you don't like in the world, in your own life, in your own body, in your own family, in your own city, and around the globe, if there's something you think of I don't like this, can you just imagine what it would be like for that person or thing or someone to make all those things right? Can you just imagine what would be fixed? Now, for the person, maybe you call yourself a Christian, again, think of this think really, what would Jesus come back and fix? And what would that day be like? Can you imagine? I mean, even practically, we talk about this even in the life of a gospel community, people getting around the room can you just imagine if Jesus walked in and sat down? Can you imagine what you would start to talk about? More specifically, can you imagine what you wouldn't talk about? What all of a sudden you'd be that's not that important. Right? Can you imagine if he walked through that door right there? Just walk through it. He can walk through walls, so I guess doesn't have to come to the door. All right, bad analogy. He entered the room. Can you just imagine for a moment what you would do and say? And I say that because while for these Greco-Roman, citizens of Corinth, steeped in Greco-Roman philosophy, they could not imagine a resurrection, a restoration of all things. They could not fathom it. I would challenge you this morning that as good 21st century Westerners, our problem isn't that we can't imagine it. Our problem is that we ignore it. And our resort, this is kind of where we go, is that either one, we avoid it altogether, completely, or two, we do everything we can to prolong it. And this is the challenge for this text, is that on one hand, for all of you in medicine, I want to say thank you. We live longer. It's really great, but just stop for a minute and think about how all of the things that are comforts for us and provide longer lifespan than any of the original readers of this text, most of the stuff that you did as a routine, just today, much less this last week, was dangerous, if not deadly, for the original readers of this text. And so when he talks about death, he's talking about something that would have been a present reality for them. Really. Think about it. The things that you weren't worried about, some of the things you ate, poisoning you, killing you. You weren't worried about, just think about it. At any given moment, you could call an ambulance right now. And so while on one hand, I want to say thank you to all of you that make us we get to live longer because of this. On the other hand, notice that it is a great barrier to a real and honest conversation about our mortality, our own death. I make this example quite often. If you think a couple centuries ago, death was the realm of the church. It was our responsibility. Think of at that particular time in medicine and I don't know, pre-funeral home, many of you would have helped prepare the body of one of your loved ones and helped to bury them. And then what we would have done is we would have buried them right outside of this building. They would have been buried in such a way that the Franciscan monks call a memento mori, a reminder of death. But in our own current culture, if you plan a city, where do you put the cemetery? Out of town, on the outskirts and edge of town, out of sight, out of mind. And now, if you do happen to drive through a city where it's in the middle of town, don't be mistaken, that was out of town when they first plotted it out. City just outgrew it, and now they're like, well, what do we do with it? We can't move it, right? You get the idea? So those are the two challenges for us, I believe. And my challenge for you is really and actually contemplate and discuss your own death and contemplate and discuss the return of Christ. Our culture just says ignore it. Don't worry about it. Avoid it. Prolong it. But in the end, you will have to come to the conclusion that while all of you in the world of medicine, I praise you for this. You're so good. These are good gifts of God that you're handling, right? While many of you have helped us prolong death, we all have to admit not a single one of you has helped us avoid it. So, he's been talking about the resurrection of the dead. He spent 34 verses on it. He's pointed us to eyewitnesses. He's pressed the logical consequences of denying the resurrection, that this life might be all there is. And he's connected that to the very identity and the very work of Jesus Christ. And right when you think he's about to wrap up, it's as if somebody in the back row raises their hand, right? Did you read verse 35, the first verse we read? Someone will ask, excuse me, how are the dead raised? What kind of body will they come with? You get it? Now, this is a perfectly reasonable question. In fact, if you've ever attended a funeral or if you've ever watched them lower the casket into the ground, you've probably asked something maybe like this. If you're a Christian yourself, what exactly is going to happen next? What exactly is going on here? What's going to take place next? Right? The body in that casket is going to decay. The molecules are going to start to change and scatter. They're going to be absorbed by the soil. They're going to be taken up by plants, eaten by animals, recycled through the entire ecosystem of the planet, right? And so when Paul says God is going to raise the dead, he's going to raise their actual bodies, what body is it exactly? Is it a body of the person that they had when they were in their teens? Or is it the body that they're going to have in their 30s? When they were 80? Is it going to be made of the same molecules? And if those molecules are now a part of some other someone else's, the molecules of some other body, are they going to get them back? Are they going to, whose body gets them? An honest person would ask this. And here's what's remarkable. Paul doesn't say, oh, that's such a wonderful question. Let me sit down and work you through the concerns. He actually looks at the motives behind the question for these people originally reading it and says, you fool. Now, why is he so harsh? It's because the question being asked is not that it's a bad question. It's being asked in the wrong way. You can hear him in the prophetic tradition, the idea that the fool says in his heart there is no God. The question that's being asked by someone who thinks the burden of proof is ultimately on God, as though God has to answer to that person. So number one, I want you to see, we're invited in the very first verse, admit the questions we are all asking. You have questions, you have skepticism. While he addresses the motive probably behind these people's question pretty sternly, notice he actually still goes on to answer it. And I would say if you have questions about the Bible, about who Jesus is, join the club. One thing I would contend for you to consider is the Bible is the most honest book you will ever read. It will never gloss over how awful things really are. It never will. And it, in fact, invites those questions. So, admit the questions they're all asking. He simply says, like, look, in the next 14 verses, I want to tell you something extraordinary. And while you might be saying, I can't imagine how this would actually work, and for the people originally reading it, because they couldn't imagine it working, because their preconceived ideas and beliefs, they thought it must not be true. It doesn't fit into my understanding of reality. It doesn't fit into my understanding of the world. And so therefore, it must not be believable. Can you relate to that? And yet, he says, look, the God who can do, right? The God who can do this. You can see it all around you. You can see it everywhere you look. You can see it everywhere you see nature. That God can absolutely do anything. That God can do what Paul is promising. So I want to give you three things. First, you see that the question we're often afraid to ask, but we're all thinking. The second, I want you to see that what he tells us as the answer that's hiding in plain sight in the garden and in creation. And then last, I want you to see the man from heaven. So the question, the answer, and then the man. Look at verse 35 again. How are the dead raised? Here's what I want you to see. Paul's not making this question up. It's not a straw man. This is an actual question being asked in Corinth, and it's likely the actual question being asked in any major city in the world, New York, London, Sioux Falls, every single day. Or at the very least, if it's not being asked, it's not being asked because it's being ignored, not because it doesn't exist. And he says, admit the questions we're all asking. But notice in his answer, get this, you fool. Here's the second thing I want you to know. If you're in this room as a skeptic, so am I. But here's what I want to challenge you with. Be skeptical of your skepticism. That is, he calls this question foolish, not because it's, like something a not smart or uneducated person would ask. No, he's saying there's a way to ask questions to gain understanding, and then there's a way to ask questions that, in this sense, like have a motive that's a rebellion against God. And just a few things I would simply tell you, right? If you're a skeptic in this room, if you're a skeptic, the problem I think you're facing right now is not that you're too skeptical. The problem you're facing is that you are not skeptical enough. You are skeptical of every single thing except yourself, except your skepticism. If you come in the room with cynicism or doubt, it's probably the problem you're facing is not that you don't have, like that you have too much. It's that you don't have enough. And I want to challenge you here, as he does, doubt your doubts. Here's what I mean. Many theologians or philosophers describe it this way. It would be like the characters of a novel, right? Questioning the existence or the goodness of the author of the book. Do you get it? Like, I don't think you're real. And like, what would the author say in that moment? Like, I made you. If anyone's not real, you're what? You'd be not real. I made you. You know what I'm saying? Like, how could you even say that? You're in the book. Do you get the idea? And this is simply the point I'm trying to make. When you say to a skeptic, Jesus rose from the dead, they say, I doubt that. But when you say to a skeptic, you know what? Your skepticism is genius. Your skepticism is probably the best way to view the entire world. They don't say, I doubt that. They go, you're right. You're welcome. And all I'm simply saying is, until you're skeptical of your own skepticism, you're not skeptic, you're just prideful. And he says to the skeptic, look, this might actually be rebellion. It might be like akin to a character in a novel questioning the existence of the author. Like, even if that were true or not true, you wouldn't know. You don't have the ability to see it. And in the ancient Greco-Roman culture or world, the people who heard Paul preaching the resurrection thought that that was also insane. He preached the resurrection in Athens in Acts chapter 17. Remember, the philosophers actually laughed at him. The Greeks had a sophisticated worldview, and in their worldview, the body was a prison. So when Paul came along and says, no, the good news isn't that your soul escapes from your body. The good news, the gospel of Jesus, who came with a real body, real death, real resurrection, is that your body is going to be raised with him. That probably sounded to them like saying, the gospel is that you're going back into the prison. You're going back into the tomb. He says, let me tell you something. I want you to know there's something going on here that even though you can't see it, hiding in plain sight is evidence that it's possible. I would say our culture is exactly the same. We just dress it up differently. Again, I don't mean to shame anyone on this, but just I want you to be, if I could get you to zoom out and listen more carefully. When someone dies, you attend a funeral around of someone that just recently died, you hear things like, she's in a better place now. Or he's looking down on us. Or she's got her angel's wings now. Whatever you might say in those moments that seem like comfort, notice what we don't say. We don't say, she's in the ground awaiting the resurrection of her body when Jesus comes back. And that would sound bizarre to modern ears, right? That sounds primitive. That's like, I would argue, just like the Greeks here, that the real hope with a Christian is a disembodied soul floating in heaven somewhere. That's not the Christian hope. That's never been the Christian hope. In fact, the Christian hope is the resurrection of the body with Jesus. And here's why this matters. The reason the question in verse 35 is so unsettling is that we sense, even if we can't fully put it into words, that our body matters. We sense this is real, it matters. We sense that we are our bodies in some deep way. When you hold a newborn baby, right, you're not just admiring the soul that's wearing its body, right? Like, what a beautiful costume this soul, right? There's something really beautiful. It's something really valuable. And when you grieve someone that you've lost, you don't just miss their disembodied essence. You miss their laugh. This is just me talking. You miss their smell. You miss their sense of humor. You miss their hands, right? You miss the way they walked into the room. Right? The body is not just a costume that the soul is putting on. There's something more beautiful, the Bible tells us, that God has actually created us in his image, bearing his image from dust, and yet in a very real way, the fingerprints of the creative God is on us. The body is wrapped up. It is a part of who we are. And so when Paul promises resurrection, he's not promising you something you should be embarrassed about. He's promising you something that I would argue your heart has been longing for all along. And it's the genuine longing to live. Really. I want to live. I don't want to die. I don't want the good things to come to an end. But then he tells us, as if to say, it's not just memories, it's not ghosts. Jesus will come and return, and he will redeem real people with real bodies, with faces, with voices. Mysteriously, we can't even put it into terms. But the answer, he says then, with what kind of body, he says it's hiding in the garden. Think of it this way. God has already written the answer to our question into creation itself. He gives us multiple lessons. One is the idea that death is a doorway to life. The seed must be buried before it blooms. Knowing that what it looks like when it's buried has nothing, visually, it seems to have nothing in common with what emerges. Think of it this way. You would never be able to guess a sunflower, like a real, like 6, 7, 8 feet tall sunflower, like massive, things big as a plate, right? You would never be able to guess that by looking at a sunflower seed. You would never go like, it just doesn't add up. And yet he's saying that's what God does. That's the kind of thing that God does regularly. Don't be startled to think of this way. And the last example he gives is that God creates bodies suited for their environments, right? Think of he's just simply saying there's, even among species, like fish have a body suited for fish things, right? Birds have a body suited for bird things. You get the idea? Humans have, he's simply saying, if God can do that, then doesn't it stand to reason that God could make resurrection bodies for resurrection things? And I know you're like, what are those things? That's a mystery we don't fully know. I have more I don't knows than answers. But here's what he's saying. It's brilliant. He doesn't answer the question with a philosophical argument. He just simply says, look at a garden. Verse 36, what you sow does not come to life until it dies. Now, I know all the botanists in the room. We have a lot of advanced, knowledge of science. It doesn't die, right? That doesn't die. And the word I know you would rather use is the word germinate, right? But Jesus uses the exact same language. That's the language they would have used to describe what we know as germination. It has to be buried. It has to start to disintegrate. It has to cease to be whatever we see in seed form. And once it's buried, it starts to turn something up. After all, this, when it first fell off the tree, was not this color. It was green. And Google tells me it could be eaten. It's a high protein. Haven't done that one yet. I'd love to hear if you have. But think in first century understanding, the language is that this has to decompose. This has to come to an end. And Jesus uses that as an illustration for his own resurrection. Look, if you don't bury a seed, if it doesn't die, then it really can't do anything. A seed just being held in air can't not help you. But a seed that dies and is buried, it says, brings a multiplicative fruitfulness. Look at a garden. God, verse 38, gives a body as he is determined. That's the clincher there. Look, he's simply saying, look, you want to know how the resurrection works? Just go out and look at creation. Look at your garden. If someone handed you a tiny little seed and then told you what it was going to become, unless you had already seen it, you wouldn't know. Your confusion about that which is to come is not an accident. It's just that you're staring at the seed. It's confusing and it seems awful. It seems and feels worse than it should. But every spring across the entire planet, billions and billions and zillions, scientific word there, things look dead, and they look buried. They look brown and decayed. And then out of all that come the stalks and the leaves, the flowers, the trees, all of them. And here's the point. The skeptic says, I can't imagine how a decayed body can become a glorious resurrected body. And Paul just says, of course you can't. In the same way that you can't imagine a sunflower from looking at a sunflower seed. But it does happen. Why? Paul says, because God gives it a body, a fitting body. God gives it a body as he is determined. Every blade of grass, every flower petal, every leaf on every tree, that is God individually deciding what kind of body to give to that seed. And he's been doing it since the beginning of existence. And he's simply saying, he's doing that right now. Hang with me. Don't quit. Don't doubt. If he can do that with a sunflower seed, do you think he can't do it with you? And then he goes on a tour. There's different kinds of flesh, humans, birds, animals, fish. There are earthly bodies and heavenly bodies, right? There's like planets, and then there's other planets, and there's stars, and even not only that, there's moons, but then there's stars that are different than other stars. There's heaven, think of he's giving a primitive understanding of what even the Hubble telescope can't quite answer these questions, but that we see the vastness of it, and he says, when you see the difference in the vastness, you're staring at what God is capable of doing. How can you look at all the things that are in existence and then doubt God's power and ability? He makes every kind of body. He makes bodies that swim, bodies that fly, bodies that walk along the ground. You get the idea. And if God is that kind of creative range, if God can fill the universe with that much beauty and that much diversity, then his question is, do you think God can give you a body fit for eternity? After all, it's a question that answers itself. And look at the 4 upgrades beginning in verse 42. 1, the upgrade from perishable to imperishable. A body that never ages, a body that never decays, a body that never breaks down. This is just from personal anecdotal experience. A body that does not bruise or break. A body that does not have aches and stiffness. You get the idea? A body that doesn't have cancer. A body that doesn't have Alzheimer's. Fill in the blank. Second upgrade is from weakness to power. A body that will never fail. It's because it's fueled by God's very spiritual power. It's no longer fueled only by food, right? The sleep. The third upgrade is from weakness to power, a body that will never, in this sense, from dishonor to glory, the full restoration of human dignity as human bearers, or as image bearers, human beings made in God's image. And then the last one, from the natural to spiritual. So from perishable to imperishable, dishonor to glory, weakness to power, and natural to spiritual. Not a ghostly existence, but a body that's fully alive to the Spirit of God, animated by the same power and Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. And from verse 42 through 44, he's very specific. It was sown perishable. It was sown in dishonor, right? Think planted. It was sown in weakness. It was sown natural. Now, he's not saying that we will be, in this sense, a ghost, but if I told you about a sailboat and I said, like, it's a wooden boat, I'm describing what it's made of. But if I say it's a sailboat, I'm describing what powers it. And the language here he's saying is that it will be a body, but it will be a Spirit-powered body. It will be fully and completely restored now entirely to the power of God through his Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead will now be motivating and animating you and me. And so the answer in this sense, what kind of body will be in heaven? It's not, I will be a ghost. The answer is, I'll have a body so real that the body I have right now is just a shadow of it. Like, you think right now you are real. He's saying you are tasting the seed of real. You're going to have a body that runs on God's Spirit instead of sleep and coffee. So then lastly, he says, in light of this, gaze upon the man of heaven. Now, he mentioned this last week that there's, as if to say there are 2 heads. The example I gave is like a king. A king can enter into treaties, a king can declare war, but everyone in that kingdom is also affected by it. Even though that person makes a decision, he's simply saying, now Western individualists, we don't like this, but he's simply saying, you were born trapped in the man of dust. This is why we say that from dust you have come and from dust you will return. You're trapped in this. And if you're like, I don't like you telling me that like Adam's decision affects me. I'm like, great, good luck with that. Try to not die. And if you can do that, then you will have been freed from the headship of Adam and sin and death that comes along with it. But until that happens, right now the death rate, as far as we can tell for each of us, is 100%. And until that changes, then you're wrapped up in Adam. But he says, by faith, don't miss this. The first Adam became a living being. The last Adam, Jesus, whereas through one Adam came death and suffering and sin, this last Adam, hear that language, Adam, think brand new, completely new. Gaze upon Jesus, the life-giving one. He's doing something here that I think is breathtaking if you gaze at it deeply. He's saying there are 2 heads of humanity. There are 2 representatives for human beings. There's Adam and then there's Jesus. Adam was made from dust, he was given the breath of life, and he became a living being. He received life. Did you get that? He was dust, and by God's power, he received life. And every single human being has descended from Adam. Every person sitting in this room, we've inherited that. We're dust. We're made of dust. We're going to go back to dust. And that's why every funeral involves some kind of a burial. That's why we say ashes to ashes, dust and dust. This is us bearing the image of the man of dust. But there came another man. The last Adam, his name is Jesus. And the last Adam doesn't just, like the first Adam, he doesn't just receive life. Did you catch it? He came that he would give life, that you and I would have life. And not just life, but life abundant, life to the full. Here's what he's saying. Look, you want to know what your resurrection body is going to look like? Look at Jesus on Easter morning. Look at the Jesus who came out of the tomb. Look at the Jesus who left it there empty, who showed Thomas his very hands and his side. The Jesus who he ate fish on the beach with his disciples. The Jesus who was recognizable, but in some sense not, because he had utterly been transformed. He appeared in a locked room, but also could be touched. That's what you're going to be like. Look, Romans 8 says it this way, that you and I have been predestined. That is God's plan. It's not plan B. He actually has a plan to be conformed to the image of his Son. Philippians 3 says it this way, that he will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. 1 John 3:2 says that when he appears, Jesus appears, we shall be like him. We'll be able to behold him because we'll be like him. Friends, you're going to be like Jesus, and he doesn't slow down there, because if you really hear what Paul's saying, it changes everything. Most of us, when we think about our future after death, we have a vague, foggy hope that it will somehow be okay. We may see our loved ones again, no more suffering, great. But he's saying there's a more vivid picture that will give you hope and courage right now. You have something concrete. There is an actual man, a man who lived in actual history and changed it by entering in. A man who had a Galilean accent. He had calloused man hands, carpenter hands, right? He had dust on his sandals. He was a man crucified by Pontius Pilate, buried in a borrowed tomb, and on the third day that same man walked out of the tomb in a body that had been utterly transformed and resurrected by the Spirit. And that is the prototype. And as you reflect on that, that is the model. That is the first fruits of what God is doing and will do in and through you. Your resurrection body, it's really you, but it's really new. It's going to be as solid as Jesus was. So here's my encouragement to you. Rehearse the gospel regularly. It is a picture of that which is to come. When we reflect on the death and resurrection of Jesus, we're not just having kind of like a historical flashback. We're having a prophetic. When we sing and rehearse and pray about and preach and hear and believe, repent and trust. When we rest in hope in the gospel, we're actually having a prophetic vision of that which is to come. There's two humanities with two destinies, and we were born into one, but we're heading from dust and to dust, but we've been reborn into Christ's family by faith, destined now for glory. This is what we celebrated every family commissioning and consecration. And here's what I want you to know. If you are discouraged, if you want to quit, listen to me carefully. You and I are destined for glory. Let me give you some encouragements in that. Number one, your body matters now. Look, Jesus is the second Adam, meaning that Christ brings something more comprehensive than just inner peace or even just religious coping mechanisms. He says it's not just like it's not just as though like there's a spiritual lift that comes from Christian convictions. No. This is not about feeling better. It might be that down the road. This is about redoing creation. Saying that Christ is the second Adam is as if to say he's going to start a whole new race. He's going to renew everything. And so while I know you might have felt needs, you want freedom from pain, freedom from suffering, freedom from anxiety, you want rest, you want strength, you want acceptance, you want to be seen and heard, you want to be known fully, all these things. You want to be loved, you want to be valued. And the interesting thing here is that when you see that those are far downstream from what Jesus actually came to do, which is to restart everything and remake everything, since he's the original manufacturer, after all, he knows how to remake things. Often, I would admit, most of the things I wish he would remake, he does not. I'll confess to you, he often remakes the things that I need and not the things that I want. And I admit to you, I'm like a character in the novel saying, what are you doing up there? And he's like, you're just looking at the chapter. Right? You're not seeing the whole book. The things we want are often too shallow. They're often far less than what we actually want or need, or what we actually need. So beware. He is God entered into the story to remake the whole thing. Don't settle for him being just a genie in a lamp to give you the things that you wish for. We would settle for fleeting pleasures. And he says, I'm not going to give you some of these fleeting pleasures. I'm going to make it all new. He brings a new creation. That means not just personal improvement. This is creation language from Genesis 1 and 2. The language in verse 49, the language of sanctification, of growing. We're being made new with resurrection power. This is what I would challenge many of you. Don't accept your sinful habits and patterns as permanent. They're not. Don't despair. Fight. Repent. Confess. Walk in the light. Don't think and talk and act like sin and death get the last word. Did you hear what he's saying? You already have the seeds planted of what is to come. Look, talk, and act that way. And that means growing as a Christian means becoming what you were made to be, to bear God's image. Look, this is practical, right? The language there, it's the language of a mirror. And you know this intuitively. A mirror only reflects what it's pointed toward. And he's saying, gaze upon the new Adam. Gaze upon the man of heaven. Turn your mirror self, designed and built to reflect the image of God. Turn it toward him. Be a mirror turned toward God, filled with God, hoping in Jesus, increasingly resembling Jesus. The image of God is renewed as the resurrection power works in us. So friend, your body matters now. If God's going to raise your body, then that means your body's not disposable, no matter what may happen to it. Your body's not just like a vehicle that you're going to throw away. Your body is going to be the evidence of God's resurrecting grace forever. Forever. It's going to be a trophy of God's renewing power forever. Do not despise what the Lord loves. What you do with your body matters. Look, Christians have the highest view of the body ever. We don't worship the body. That's the world's mistake. But we don't despise the body either. That's a religion's mistake. Instead, we honor the body because of who made it and who's going to raise it. Second, that means that your suffering is not the final word. If you're sitting here in a body that hurts, in a body that's betrayed you, maybe a body you don't even recognize anymore, a body that's been marked by disease or disability or aging or assault or pain, suffering, fill in the blank. I want you to hear this. The body you have right now is the body you'll have forever, which says everything you need to know about the love of God for you, really you. The body you have right now is not the body that you will have forever. It's just a seed. It's a seed. By the power of God, it will become what it will become. But you can be honest. And the Bible is so refreshingly honest here. It's a seed. It's sown in weakness. But it will be raised in power. It experiences regularly and will be sown in dishonor. But friend, because of Jesus, it will be raised in his glory. And the pain that you carry in your body is real. Don't let anyone dismiss it. But neither let anyone make it into an identity, and neither let anyone make it into something that you want to discard. It is not permanent. There is a body that's coming for you that has never been sick a day in its life, and it never will be. And the reason is this: death is lost. Death looks like a final word, but in fact, he tells us here it's not the end of the sentence, it's just a comma. Because of Christ, death is more like planting a seed. And the God who has been growing flowers out of dirt for millennia, that God has done something to reverse the effects of death. That God is going to grow you and I, all that have fallen asleep believing in Christ. God is going to grow us out of the grave into something more glorious than right now you can possibly imagine. Notice next week he'll even taunt death. He'll quote an Old Testament prophet: death, where's your victory? Death, where's your sting? Right? Like, what do you got, death? Death thought it had won at every single funeral that you and I have ever attended. But death is going to find out on the last day that it was always Jesus who was winning. There is a man from heaven, and he came down, and he died, and he rose. And the day that he comes again, he will speak your name and mine, really you, and make you really new. And the seeds that we have planted in the ground in tears will burst into bloom. And we'll look at our hands, our hands will be like his hands. And we'll look at each other and we will see what we were always meant to be. That just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, so shall we bear the image of the man from heaven. I'm going to invite you now. Would you bow your heads with me and pray? God, we confess we have settled for hope that's just too small. We've settled for things that maybe in this case are just vague and ghostly, rather than hoping in and gazing on the resurrected Jesus. We confess in death or in suffering, we confess we have grieved as those who have no hope. We've looked at suffering and we've contemplated the reality. This is all there is. This is all there ever will be. God, we confess that unbelief as a kind of rebellion. We confess that unbelief as sin. It's like contemplating reality, but somehow in pride, disregarding the existence of God, as though we're the arbiters of what is true and what is false. So God, grant us things that only you can do. First, grant us the fortitude, maybe through grief and lament, to contemplate death. And yet, Lord, don't let us do that apart from the exhortation and encouragement here. Let's contemplate death as we contemplate the resurrection of Jesus. So, Lord, will you fill this room with kind of a holy humility? I know this seems dark. It starts off troubling, but would you fill us with that kind of holy humility so that you'll fill us with a kind of courage that comes from it? Of knowing that the thing we've been avoiding, the thing we've been trying to outsource, the thing we've been trying to push out of town is actually just the seed. It's just the seed of what you mean to do in and through us forever and ever. So through that, Lord, would you grant us courage? Grant us the courage to imagine and contemplate. Give us the courage to live lives that are meaningful, knowing that as we share the gospel, as we live out the gospel, as we fight sin, as we gather together, as we're sent out, all of these things, these matter because this body that you've given us bears the image of its creator, and it will bear the image of its redeemer. Fill us with the kind of courage that comes from that. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.